Hello everyone! Can you feel that crispness in the air as fall is rolling in? It's my favorite season and my favorite holiday is coming up, and I thought I would share with you one of my favorite projects that I have done in a while. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss future videos, especially one where we are going to be decorating the inside of this house. But for now, settle in and join me as we transform this $15 thrifted dollhouse into a creepy witch's haunted cottage. I found this pre-built dollhouse on Facebook Marketplace for $15. It was such a good deal, I could not pass it up. With a little bit of Googling, I found that it was the Duracraft Colombian dollhouse, probably from the 90s. All in all, this house was in really good shape. There are a few pieces missing or scuffed, and that's okay. The roof trim I'll replace anyway. The window shutters that had hearts on them don't really fit the aesthetic I'm going for, so I'll probably just remove those hearts. But the rest of the house looks really good, and even the windows with the white diamond window panes look really good. I'll probably just keep those. The biggest challenge for this project that I'm gonna stick with is using up my current craft stash, which is pretty extensive, and I'm gonna try to not purchase any new materials or just keep that as minimal as possible. I started by removing the window shutters and window boxes. That'll be easier for me to sand them down, paint them, and also have access to the exterior walls of the house. I thought I would start with the exterior walls of the house, and I went back and forth on what to do there, whether it was going to be brick or stone, and I landed on brick, and I didn't want to cut out individual brick pieces and lay them on. So I thought of this idea. I had it already in my stash, 2mm thick craft foam, and I had enough to cover all the walls. So I went through and scored at 1/2-inch increments horizontally with a ballpoint pen, and then I went back through and did some vertical lines on those rows to create individual bricks, and then outlining those in kind of a rounded way to look like a natural brick. Before all that though, I had placed the foam pieces over the walls where they would be, and with quite a bit of trial and error, got them to cut down to the size that I needed, and then I just placed on some tacky glue with a brush and put the foam in place. Next up, it's time to actually paint the brick. So I mixed up kind of a medium shade of gray with black and white acrylic paint that I had, and I dry brushed that on with a mop brush. And laying it on softly over the top of the foam, that gray will stick to the top of the brick while the indented lines will stay black. After that medium gray layer was dried, I mixed up an even lighter color of gray, almost a white, and I dry brushed that on top. And I laid the color down heavier in some places than in others, just to add a little bit of contrast and make the brick look kind of weathered. And then I just repeated the same steps on the other side of the house and the front of the house. The front was a little bit challenging with the windows and angles and all that, so I put the foam in place in different pieces after a bit of trial and error. Next up was the roof. I didn't want to paint it a straight black, so I created a stain, more of a wash, from a black acrylic paint mixed with water. I applied that to the shingles and tried to get into every nook and cranny, and it ultimately gave it a really cool weathered look. I added even more stain on top of the already dried stain to give it more contrast and make some shingles darker than others. I think it turned out pretty good. I wanted to add some decorative trim on top of the roof to make it look more like a classic haunted house or an old cottage. And sticking with my challenge to not purchase anything new, plus I couldn't really find anything I liked online anyway, so I went into my stash and I found these coffee stir sticks and some long matches. So I cut the stir sticks down as posts and I used the long matches as horizontal posts, and I glued those all together to create this kind of fence style roof trim. Then I attached the trim to the very top of the roof and painted it black, which is coincidentally one of my favorite Rolling Stones songs. So now that the very top of the roof trim is done, I wanted to add some detail to the gables and the eaves areas of the roof. To clean up those edges, I added some trimmed popsicle sticks and painted everything black. It is time to deal with these window shutters. I started by removing off the hearts and sanding the wood down. And then I gave them a nice coat of a deep burgundy red. I thought that would look really nice off of the gray brick and black accents. And then I brushed them with a black wash to give them kind of an aged and weathered look. And then I painted the window boxes and installed them back in place. Now it's time to create a door for our house. The fun and challenging part about all this is that we are doing a lot of retrofitting. So I need to create a door that will fit the arched doorway of this house. I started by putting together essentially a plank of larger popsicle sticks and smaller popsicle sticks to hold them all together. I then carefully measured the opening of the doorway and then transferred that onto the wood and cut it out. Then I created a wash using dark brown and red to create a color to kind of match the shingles of the roof. I applied that as a stain and I wiped it off, and I kept doing that until I got to the color that I wanted. Then I took a tool that I actually used to do my nails with, but it has kind of a sharp end, and I took that to the wood after it dried and kind of roughed it up. And then I added a layer of watered down black acrylic paint to fill in those gashes. And then I wiped that off to leave kind of a weathered look. Now, attaching the door was a real pain in the eyes, but I figured it out with a lot of finagling and patience and hot glue. Now, you might not believe me, but I actually already did have miniature door hinges and what I think is a miniature door handle. I'm not sure. It could have been for like cabinets or something. I had them in a stash that I was saving for some other project that I never did, but definitely using them here. Okay, now for the bottom foundation portion of the house. I didn't want to use brick like I had on the exterior walls, and I wanted to look a little bit different. So I thought of a kind of a concrete texture. I created this by mixing up some black and white paint to make a gray, some water, and some Mod Podge, and I laid that down in a layer. And then I added some crappy one-ply toilet paper that I had accidentally bought. And that actually worked out really well, adding more Mod Podge paint on top of that, and just kind of crunching it up and adding more paint layers until it looked kind of like concrete. I repeated the same steps on the other sides of the house and waited for that to dry. After that, I mixed up a wash with a bit of black and dark brown and lots of water, and I overlaid that on top of the dried gray paint to give it some texture and aged look. Next up is a porch area for our house, and Because I didn't want to take up a whole lot of room and use a whole lot more materials to create a porch, although I do think that would look pretty neat, I decided to stick with just some simple cottage-looking stoneway steps in front of the door. I started by cutting out 2 separate stairway levels out of styrofoam and sanding those down. It was super messy. I decided that the stairs needed a little bit more height, so I glued them together and then glued them on top of a piece of foam core, and that ended up being the perfect height for our stairway. Then I took some paper egg cartons and ripped them up into little pieces, little stone-shaped pieces, and started to place them with tacky glue around the styrofoam steps. Now for painting the stone steps, I mixed up a creamy gray color and I applied that just all over the egg carton and styrofoam steps. Then I mixed up a kind of medium dark gray and applied that to the individual stones. Then, following a tutorial by Queen City Minis, I will add a link to her video in the description, I added some different colors to the stones. Yellow, orange, red, green, some brown. The idea is that the color will subtly come through, adding a little bit more paint and wash on top of that. I would definitely recommend looking at her tutorial because what I did here, I just ended up kind of overworking it all. It was my first time trying the egg carton faux stone tutorial, so I ended up kind of overworking it, but in the end, I think it looks okay. After that first layer of paint, I added a black wash, let that dry, then dry brushed on some light gray white to show the highlights of the stones. Then I went back through and added a dark brown black wash in between the stones to try to highlight some of that contrast. Then I added some matte Mod Podge on top, and I think it ended up looking pretty good. I realized as we're getting close to done, it is about time to glue our house onto the foundation board. And I actually found this board by just looking through various frames I had. I had an IKEA frame, and this was the backing of it, and it seemed pretty sturdy to use as a foundation board for our house so that we can create a yard and add all kinds of cool stuff to it. So I thought we would need a dark color base. I just mixed up some brown and black and painted that over the entire board. I had this idea to create a creepy jack-o'-lantern scarecrow, so I found an old foam pumpkin from some Halloween decorations and attached that to a couple of twigs. I glued those to a base and painted the pumpkin orange. I found some cheesecloth, which I dyed gray off camera, glued that to the sticks to kind of give it this old creepy scarecrow vibe, and then I gave him a face. Next up for the yard was to create a creepy old worn down fence. I will post a longer video on how I created this, but essentially just cut up some popsicle sticks and stained with a wash of dark brown and black, and then I dry brushed with a layer of light gray and white. I created just enough fencing for the front 2 corners of the yard and then glued those into place. Adding more details to the house, I found some white paper roses for the window boxes and added some moss. Adding a few final touches to the roof area, I wanted to put something above the door, and I found this old moon charm, so I clipped off the jump ring portion, added that to a black painted circle, and put that in the area above the door. This wouldn't be a true cottage without some moss on the roof shingles. I already had some of that blended turf flocking stuff in my stash, so I threw that on there, resisting the urge to cover the entire roof in moss. But then I thought it looked a little too green for autumn, so I mixed up a couple washes of orange, light brown, dark brown, placed those on the moss, and it looked really good when it dried. I also added some moss to the fencing. I wanted to create a dirt pathway with some stone steps leading to the front door, and I went back and forth on what to use for the dirt, and then I went out into my backyard and just grabbed some dirt, and that actually worked out really well. Then I added a few stepping stones, that I had made out of the egg carton material. Then I added some moss and acrylic wash like I had done on the roof shingles. And now for decorating the yard, I'd placed in a few trees that I made from twigs in my backyard and spray painting them black. And of course adding our jack-o'-lantern scarecrow friend. I put down a layer of glue and then placed Spanish moss all over the yard. And instead of having the yard just look brown, I wanted to add some interest and dimension. So I had this idea to put down a layer of hairspray and then sprinkle on a little bit of the green flocking I had used for moss on the roof, then another quick layer of hairspray, and I wanted to add some orange, so I grabbed some cayenne pepper from my pantry and sprinkled that on with one final layer of hairspray to secure everything. And time to add the final touches. I had so much fun working on this project, and honestly, I can't wait to decorate the inside. It was a really fun challenge to go into my stash and try to use up things I had instead of purchasing new stuff, and I did pretty well. The total that I spent on this project came out to $22. Just $15 for the dollhouse itself that I bought on Facebook Marketplace, plus $2.50 for the lamp that I put by the front door, $4.50 for all the little pumpkins, and everything else I either made from scratch or already had in my craft stash. And there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me for a little bit, and let me know what you all think in the comments and if you have any ideas for how to decorate the inside. Thanks for watching!